Of assessment and reading and instruction. This week we're going to be looking at Common Core state standards and assessments and their implications. So we're going to review the major shifts embedded in these new generation standards. We're going to model how to unpack testing items so that you can do that on yourself for your own, and then we're going to begin to consider pedagogical implications of the standards and the assessments. Please know that I would expect that you have a copy of the Ohio New Learning Standards, whether they're digital or print. If you are a distance student coming from a different state, or you're in a teaching situation where the Common Core state standards are more relevant to your situation, certainly you can use those instead. Please also know that if you need any help reading the standards or things like that, I will be happy to include a few handouts and some video links under handouts on Leo for you. Okay, so the first thing we want to look at is how did we get to where we are right now. And so the Common Core state standards date back to 2008 when the Arizona governor, Janet Napolitano, she was heading the National Governors Association, and in 2008-2009 she and her peers wrote a paper that focused an initiative on improving math and science scores, as well as college and career development. It was the college and career development piece that really refocused them onto literacy, onto reading, writing, and language and listening. Before that, though, it's important to understand that the National Governors Association, this was really rooted in their experiences with No Child Left Behind. No Child Left Behind, which was George W. Bush's policy that was passed by a Democratic Congress. You know, it required some pretty hefty testing regimen, and that needed to be reported, and from those reporting, states were assessed. But the problem became, when it became clear that some states, such as Massachusetts, had very intense, very complex testing requirements, whereas other states did not. And so places like Massachusetts that had high standards and high expectations were actually kind of penalized for that, and so they decided to get together and look at that. They partnered with the Council of Chief State School Officers and Achieve, which is a nonprofit education organization, where they developed first the anchor standards and college career readiness standards as a way to kind of focus them. And then they had a really intense multiple-year process where more than 400 teachers, educators, some of the NEA, AFT, many of the stakeholders were brought together to iron out and work out the standards that we saw today. Education became, has largely traditionally been a local issue, a locally controlled issue, and so there was some pushback right from the beginning. But in 2014, when the states, I think it was 42 states had signed on to be Common Core states, but in 2014, when they agreed to the testing regimen, that's when things really became difficult, because voters were waking up, parents were waking up to headlines such as this one from Cleveland.com that talked about just how many more students were being assessed as not having met the standards on some of these national exams, such as the Park exam. And so this created, some pushback and some political headaches for educators. In Ohio, what we did was in 2017, there was a revision of the Common Core state standards, and they were slight revisions. Really, essentially, Ohio is still considered a Common Core state standards state. However, they did include some minor changes, some clarifications to the standards, so they're not identical to the national standards. And really, I think an important change was the previous standards, the original standards, really focused on new criticism, like to go just to the text and only to the text, which really left out what we know from reader response theory, transactional reading theory, that students' prior knowledge, their interests, their culture all play a role, and they bring all of that to the text as well when they're constructing meaning from the text. And so the revised standards really brought in some verbiage that allowed for that. However, substantively, the standards remain the same. While Ohio has created its own assessments, the assessments really still continue to reflect the rigor and the expectations of the Common Core state standards. So what are some of those changes? We are in our 10th, or 2010 was when they came online. So we're getting close to the end of our first decade of Common Core state standards. And so this is probably by way of review for most of us, but let's talk about what was changed as a result of the Common Core state standards. The first shift that we can look at is the increased reflection on what is happening in a student when we look at a student's progression, when we look at their vertical progression through the K-12 system. Are they getting increasingly complex texts, both literary and nonfiction? Are they developing academic language? So the tier 2, if you remember from the reading panel, those higher frequency words, are they becoming more and more complex? Are they learning strategies for those tier 2 to be able to decode and understand that academic language? That became an important part of the shift. The other thing that was really, really important is that reading, writing, and speaking became grounded in evidence from the text, both literary and informational. We talked a little bit last week about the fact that some assessments, some of the questions students can answer just because of their prior knowledge and not necessarily because of the text. Well, that was a problem. And so what we saw was that we saw a shift to argumentative informational writing away from personal writing. Narrative writing is still in the standards, but there's an increasing emphasis on informational argumentative writing, research as well, because moving to the text to back up your inferences and your claims, that becomes increasingly important, as well as an increasing emphasis of understanding how an author is constructing his or her argument. And then the last one is the building of knowledge through content-rich nonfiction. Really, from kindergarten up, there's a belief that at least 50% of the students reading in the K-5 setting should be literary, and then the other 50% should be informational. When you move into secondary, where there's this belief that there's a lot more content instruction, in science and history and technology, that's why you see literacy standards for the social sciences, you see literary standards for the sciences, for technical fields. There's this idea that the students need to continue to develop and to refine their ability to build knowledge through nonfiction. So I'm just giving you, this is the state of New York. This is their shifts that they identified, and really those are pretty much covered in the earlier, but I wanted to take a minute and have you think, when you think about last week's reading, the reading where we looked at the report on the National Reading Panel and the suggestions for teachers, you can really get a sense of the pressure that the Common Core state standards placed on the education system, because this is far and away more sophisticated. Much of the reading panel was looking at decoding and skill-based approaches, and now we see that the ELA very quickly is drawing us to argumentation and inferential thinking, and so we can see that the Common Core state standards placed quite a bit of pressure on the system. And so what I want to say is really an important part of, or part of the reason why people started to care about these shifts was because of the assessments, the high stakes testing that was embedded in the Common Core and became adapted into in much of the education policy, so that it was the assessments that kind of really drew people's attention. So let's look to see what are the new generation of tests. So what are these tests that students are going to be taking? And so I'm going to show you a little video from Engage New York, where the speaker is going to look at or talk about why or how these new generation of tests might feel different for students?
The tests will be more challenging. They'll reflect the Common Core. So the passages that students will be asked to read will be more challenging than the kinds of things they've been asked to read in the past. They will be required to use evidence to support their arguments. They will be required to do multiple-step math problems that will really test their conceptual understanding in mathematics. So it is true that the tests will be more challenging because the Common Core standards are more challenging than our existing state standards. But again, we've been moving our curriculum since 2010 towards the Common Core. It wouldn't have made any sense to have our assessments not reflect the curriculum that we're teaching. And so we've got to have a alignment between the assessments and the instruction. And as students are now engaged in Common Core instruction, we need to assess their performance against the Common Core, and it will inform educators and parents about where we are with respect to the Common Core, and really with respect to college and career readiness. But lower proficiency scores, a lower percentage of 3s and 4s, does not mean that schools are doing worse or that students have learned less. What it tells us is where we are against the bar of college and career readiness.
Okay, so certainly we ended up with some changes to the Common Core, to our testing, that really increased sort of the stakes. And so, in February of last year, the Educators Writers Association commissioned a study of tests. 14 education assessment experts evaluated the proficiency tests that were used in Massachusetts. They used Massachusetts because that was considered one of the most sophisticated proficiency test systems. And so they looked at the Massachusetts tests before the Common Core, and then they compared it to several different new generation tests, Common Core aligned tests. And interesting, they found that the math was not that very different from the testing that came ahead of the Common Core. But there was significant differences in the ELA assessments. And the test, the researchers talked about how much more sophisticated the new testing was, and that the students were really asked to respond to more open-ended responses, to draw on analysis, that they were much more text passage dependent, and so they were just far more rigorous than had previously been asked and required of our students. And so, some of the things that I wanted to point out to you then is, in Ohio, in our ODE website, you can find a lot of information about the test, but I thought it would be interesting for you to be able to see the blueprints really, and we're going to be looking at the blueprints as for part of our assessment and our assignment, but the blueprints are really, really important. They're really key. And so when you look at these blueprints, what you can start to see is that we have a increasing emphasis on reading informational texts when we look at them from 3 years. So if I looked at the English 3, the ELA 3, you'll see that it reflected a 45-40 literary text to informational text was 45-55. But when you move into the high school, you're going to see that moves up to 40-60 split. So that's part of it. I think you can see the different, the way the different standards are related to the testing and the emphasis that it gives. And so the testing blueprint kind of gives us a little bit of an understanding of the test and what to expect. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you one more video. This one comes from, it comes from, in the early years, it's from the teaching channel, it's on the teaching channel, and in the early years of the Common Core, there was a lot of in-servicing to help teachers to unpack the standards and to unpack test items. As you're watching the video, I want you to consider these questions. I want you to consider, what can we learn from examining sample assessment items? How can sample assessment items help you to create your own questions? And how can you imagine using sample assessment items in your own teaching? Okay, so let me start this video. It's going to take a minute for me. Unfortunately, none of these could be embedded directly into my...
Step 5 takes us into what do students need to know, what do they need to be able to do to demonstrate that they're meeting or approaching mastery of the standard. If you look at that very first item, it's a vocabulary item. What's the meaning of the word adversary as it's used in paragraph 21 of the passage from Byron's Winter? In step 5, we really look at what are the standards and evidences that are being measured. There are actually 2 standards being measured, RL4 and L4. Now ask yourself, what do the students need to know to be able to answer the item?
If they would have to know how to use context and how to go back to the text.
With step 5, we're really looking at the task and asking what students need to really know and understand, and then how would they apply and synthesize that knowledge and understanding.
We actually got to align the questions that were asked for the text to the standards. So what I learned from that process, I'm able to figure out how to create my own questions back in the classroom so that I can align the standards to the questions that I'm asking of my students as well.
An exciting moment happened in working with the middle school team and looking at an item around summary. The item itself asks for students to take a series of statements and to choose 4 of those statements to drag and drop into a box in sequence to create an objective summary.
The first thing they have to learn is, what do you actually see from these choices that actually is in the text?
We talked about what would be involved in such an activity, and we agreed that part of what students need to know and be able to do is to understand what's the difference between an objective summary and a non-objective summary. What does that mean to be objective? Not an I believe this is what's important about the text, but this is what the text says, and here's the order that it says it, and these are the most important ideas, the most salient points, and that ability to abstract from a text is such a critical college and career ready skill.
It's multi-disciplinary.
Yes.
Your science teacher has
Yes.
to, your social science teacher has to, that's going to reinforce a skill that they can take to any test.
In order for students to be able to be successful, they really had to have that understanding of the story structure, the text structure, and also character development, and how characters have struggles and conflicts with themselves and those around them, and how those struggles cause them to grow and change and evolve over time.
So as far as what I learned from that process, I'm able to figure out how to create my own questions back in the classroom so that I can align the standards to the questions that I'm asking of my students as well.
Okay, so that gives you a little bit of some sort of context of, and I want you to consider that, because what I'm going to ask you to do over this week is to take a moment and to really look at a test yourself. So let's talk about what's due this week. What you're going to be doing, I want you to know that first of all, because of the holiday weekend, I've chosen to give you until 10 a.m. on the 4th. That gives people that are not working ahead, that gives you some time to be able to be with your family over the holiday weekend. It also means that the next module you're going to have a little bit less time on it, so bear that in mind if you take the option of the extended time. But you have 2 things that you need to do for this week. The first thing that you need to do is you need to complete the test item analysis assignment. You're going to post on the forum and respond to another person's post there, and then you're going to select from the readings for this week, and you're going to write a quick summary of the reading and 3 key takeaways about what you read, and you're going to submit that on Leo. And so what I thought I would do is I thought I would kind of give you a little bit of, let me go into Lake Erie, let me go into Leo for a minute and show you sort of, oh shoot, I don't know what's going on here. Lake Erie College. I had it set up, but I don't know where it went. I have too many things open now. But failed to open. All right. lec.edu. Let's see here. Okay. So when you go into Leo, give me a second here. Okay. Sorry, I know this is tedious. All right, I will get there, I promise. Okay, let me put this into your view so that you can see this. Okay, so what I wanted to show you was that when you go into the coursework for the week, you are going to have the test item analysis, and this is going to be something that you're going to write a paper for this. You're going to upload your document here for me, as well as you're going to then, I'm going to ask you to also go into the collaboration and post on the forum so that people can get your thoughts. So that's the first thing that we're going to do, and that's under the coursework. And then what I wanted to show you is that the other thing that you have is a very quick reading reflection, and what I want you to do for the reading reflection is I actually have 5 different articles, and I have them PDF'd. I also have them linked so that if you wanted to get your own copy on EBSCOhost so that you can use your Dropbox or whatever to save them. I have some readings, and I want you to do that reading. And what I want you to do in that reading, then when you're done with that reading, is I want you to write a very short response to it. I want you to give me the citation, and then I want you to write a quick summary of the reading, and then offer 3 key takeaways from what you read, so that you can kind of start to think about some of the pedagogical implications of the Common Core. If you have any questions, you certainly can always email me with questions, but hopefully everything is accessible and there for you on Leo. So, all right. Well, thank you. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and I will talk to you later. Bye.